Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Data Day's thematic session 2. My name is Chris Burns, and for the next roughly hour and a half, we're going to be talking with 5 different presentations on serving citizens with data visualization, data viz. What works, what innovative techniques there are out there, how to better engage with citizens, with people, how to meet their needs. And so with these 5 presentations, each with 15 minutes and 5 minutes of Q&A. We want to get you involved as well via a swap card. You can send your questions. You can also network, and you can also hopefully tweet out hashtag EU Open Data Days, hashtag EU Open Data Days on the social networks. If you hear something great, that would be good to cast wider. Let's get started right away with how automated data visualization became indispensable during the COVID pandemic. And I like this, the name of this company, Datawrapper, with a W. I think it's really great. Mirko Lorenz, you are the chairman and co-founder of Datawrapper, and tell us about it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm more excited than I thought, because what I'm trying to do is document a moment in time about the usage of data in a very special situation. And I think it's important to talk about it because there is considerable, how it was pointed earlier, a vector for innovation here in practicality, because out of necessity, newsrooms and sources had to work together in new ways in order to inform the public. And that's what I would like to focus on in the next 15 minutes. Very quickly about who is speaking, primarily just to give my point of view. I'm a journalist by background. I worked as a journalist for more than 15 years. I studied history and economics because I was always interested how economics are affecting all of us, and how some people have more power, how some people have less power. Always fascinating topic. And since I'm a member of 2 worlds, the EU world as well, since for the last 10 years, I'm working for Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster in EU research projects. And out of that interest, out of that context, in 2009, I became involved with the data-driven journalism movement. I would call it a movement. Chris, there were earlier attempts or approaches in the US, computer-assisted reporting, precision reporting, but it was always highly specialized. Only the people that would really know how to work computer on a very high level would use chat. And we are talking today about democratizing this approach to data across the newsroom for everyone. So I would like to go back in time just, for measuring how far we got. This is, at the time, highly influential article by Adrian Holopati, an American who was an innovator in data publication. He wrote a coding library at the time. He's a journalist and a coder, so a rarity. And what he said in 2006 already is that newspapers needed to change their approach to writing stories, that they should take more of a structural approach, that they should not say, oh, there's a story, then we write it, and then we forget about the whole context. Instead, seeing that communities, societies, localities are driven by ongoing data to quite an extent. How many funerals do you have? How many accidents do you have? How is unemployment? That is an ongoing topic. Newsrooms were not the best in understanding the structure of this resource. They were not taking data as serious as the words and the pictures for a long, long time. And that has changed. That has changed very deeply, and that's what I'm going to go deeper into. And that was one of the reasons why we founded Datawrapper almost 10 years ago by now. The idea was to make it much, much simpler for everyone to create a chart in a no-code interface. We are piggybacking on popular libraries like D3. D3 is a popular library to do visualized data. And what we're doing here is providing an interface so that not 1 or 2 or 5 journalists in a newsroom, but 100, 150, 200 have the option to integrate a chart, a line chart, a bar chart, a more complicated map or a complicated table into their reporting. This is what is on offer. The tool actually needs no training. I can I can show someone to use it in half an hour, or maybe even 10 minutes, because there's a lot of guidance in there. So it's even less complicated, say, like Photoshop or Word. It's a structured approach. And we've seen quite an amount of usage. Actually, we are self-funded, which is quite important. We are an independent, small European company, by now used around the world, which makes us proud to an extent. And one way to measure, we are entirely GDPR conform. We are not tracking any users, but we're tracking one thing, that is embedded chart views, meaning when one user has created a chart, we can see how often that chart has been accessed. We cannot see anything else. We actually did not have to sign any data processing agreements with all the newsrooms because they found out, or we could convincingly show we are not tracking anything beyond that point. And something interesting or something enormous happened early 2020. We were hovering around 295 million chart views, which is already a lot on a monthly basis in January. And then the pandemic came, and you see the chart here, how it went up. It's almost 17-fold, 18-fold in terms of usage. And that's across all newsrooms that were publishing charts. So we were approaching 4.7 billion embed views in April. Yeah. And that is just a part of the picture. We know from other newsrooms, all the newsrooms all of a sudden had data pages that were the most trafficked. And I will come back to that the society formed a habit to look for the COVID data just like they look at the weather. It's not more, it's not less, but it was an important data point, an important information point. I would hope that in the future we, in a positive way, we can show how we are making progress with other complicated things. In addition, I found out I made a big mistake. I put my headline like the pandemic was over. It's not, absolutely not. And I would like go relatively quickly. I cannot go into every detail. It would take a day potentially to discuss all the details of what happened. How the pandemic led to new workflows between the sources and the newsrooms and the public out of necessity. And how it, in part, resulted in a much better collaboration between government, scientific, and statistical institutions like Johns Hopkins and the newsrooms, and summarize that. So this is the structure. And I took out this one because I researched a bit whether there was a reflection already in our community and the scientific and journalistic community. And this is an interesting one because they talked to a number of scientific sources and they asked them for their verdict, what actually changed through the pandemic. And I only read one sentence: technology factors, widespread interest for tracking phenomena, pandemic context of concern, scientific community at large focusing on the pandemic, all that converged to a new sharing philosophy, new sharing approaches. Things that should be obvious but were complicated before and are still need some. So here are just some of the tables and charts and so that were produced in as many languages. But I will say this, the role of this tool, and there are others and similar approaches, and that's entirely fine, is to simplify, to make the barrier a little bit lower while not degrading the quality of the data reporting or the visualization, the correctness of the visualization, but lowering the barrier to actually publish charts out, of course, responsively. That's super important. You cannot publish any charts today that are not responsive because 50 to potentially even 70% of the user will see it on a mobile screen. And so this is one feedback. We were very proud that New York Health as an institution started to use Datawrapper because they found it of use to inform New York City. And this cross combination of working together, a tool from here being used for the New York society, New York inhabitants, that's what it's all about, I think, what the good part of technology is. And what he said is it's a no-code interface that helped us develop the chart and just do it and not have to go into a lengthy coding project. So now, to automation. Normally, it's quite complicated to say I'm automating this because you don't know how the data might change. You need to check it on a daily basis. That was a bit different with the COVID data. As long as the models and the approaches would stay the same, you could automate. This is just for comparison, the copy and paste approach, like doing it manually. You have a an Excel chart or whatever with some clean data. I would like to note with many sources, this cleaning process takes time. In order to clean the data that is already there, journalists might spend 1 or 2 hours, depending on how complex the views have been done. But then you copy it in and then you create a chart. So this is the next step. I already switched the screen, connecting it to a Google Sheet. This is a great technology because essentially any Google Sheet is kind of an online database. It has a URL, so you can connect to it, and we are enabling that, but only for 29 days. Then you have to actually go into the chart and republish it because we invented it for elections, and we thought like after 30 days, you know, the interest in this data might wane, so we wanted to avoid having thousands of charts that we could never switch off, right? So they stopped working after time. But that's, of course, not enough. So another option is to directly connecting to a cleaned data set in a database. And this is what is provided here. It would be then a CSV file, comma separated values. So that is already part of this working together, like how this is prepared by the source and how it can be picked up by the newsroom. And I will go back to that. I talked to some of the larger users like AP, Associated Press. They are extremely dependent on not changing sheets, because if something changes, they might or might not notice. Usually they notice because something breaks in the script, but that is important to consider in these change of automation. And I heard that this process of the source working together with the newsroom could be optimized. I mean, in specific, they were asking for office hours, like somebody to be able to reach someone. So even one step further, and that is where it's getting, integration across institutions could be done. Our tool has an API. A lot of other these platforms have APIs, meaning an application programming interface. You can actually go into this application and control it by using some code. And usually it's set up just once and with recurring data. Like the pandemic data, but that also accounts for unemployment data, for climate change data, and so on. This is the way to go. Because, for example, I give just one example how this could be used. Any source with this API could have a button under the raw data and say, want to create a chart with that? Just click this button and it's done. Just an example. In a lot of cases, if you go to the sources, you will find the source stops thinking about distribution at its own homepage. That is fair enough, I understand that, but potentially it needs to be rethought. Like, how can we, enable usage, make usage simpler beyond our homepage, and even benefit from that by a wider reach? Because even a lot of these government institutions are looking at usage, like it's not their main driver, and it shouldn't be. They are not commercial companies, but reaching as widely, as big audience as possible, together with media who is kind of amplifying something that has been seen by thousands to millions. And that's the key point about working together with media. Why not make it simpler? Why not make these overpasses like easy to walk? So it goes even one step further, and this is a nice story to share because what could you do else? Right now, what I described would change the data in the chart automatically. But what about the headline? The headline should adapt as well, right? How can you do that? So we thankfully had a colleague, he's now a PhD, so yes, it's closer to rocket science. He's a PhD candidate for computational social sciences in Munich. But he was a journalist in training with Süddeutsche Zeitung. And in his spare time, I really assured me that it was like this. He said, yeah, I had time and I did it. He wrote an integration, a library to enable the use of Datawrapper together with R. And like I would say 50%, maybe 80% of the listeners will know. For the ones that don't, R and Python are the two main languages around the world that are used by for data analytics and data scientists. So R, Revolution, I think that's the name. It's an open source software, very, very powerful. And he wrote this thing that allows to kind of program your scripts in a way that you get the data, it's run into R, and you have your own script, then you hand it over to Datawrapper, and even you control everything. And because we were delighted about that happened just by coincidence before the pandemic. Like he came around the corner with that thing in late 2019, December. So we invited him for a guest post, and I just singled out, that you see it's not super, super complicated. You just know how to do it. And there will be someone in any newsroom and any source knowing how to operate. It's not, a book with seven keys to it. It's quite accessible in terms of a lot of people know perfectly well how to work with it. And what I'm pointing out is that there is an evolving new connection point between things. And resources like this one, this would be a total rarity in a newsroom to have a GitHub resource, like have this code, have the charts in there. And that's what a lot of newsrooms by now have. They created it out of necessity during the pandemic. So you can tie together this bits of code with your own code. So all of a sudden you have always on, always running data resources that are, of course, saving a lot of time, that are capable of handling millions of requests. Yesterday in the opening speech, somebody said, what if the pandemic would have happened 5 to 10 years earlier? Would the technology be there? I would say today it is there. And we should be thankful about the lot of open source elements that are helping us using that without running into millions of costs. So I would like to
Mirko, I know that you have a little more to say, but we have about 3 minutes left. If you can wrap it up.
Yeah,
and I have a question for you too.
Yes, but I should go through it. So very quickly, how can you make it even easier? This is a feature that I would like to point that we have on our blog. If you hover over it, you can take over the chart. It's a surprise for many, but it could be done like in the same way as I described with you. We created a number of charts in this way that for reuse by newsrooms. So they were connected, or they are still connected to Johns Hopkins data collection, like the ones here in the lower right. This one is actual data from 2 days ago. This has been created 2 years ago, but as you can see, it's still being updated, and the numbers look quite grim for Germany. And these have even been used on television screens. So the final thing that I wanted to mention is yet a different approach. It's called a river. And besides this sharing on the homepage, why not create a river of data that can be used down the road, like an institution from the EU, from World Bank, whatever, is providing these charts for reuse in a controlled manner, because that's what's happening here. It's an option for publishing. You can add some data to it, but then people around the world can go into it. I have to admit, we have that for quite a time, and it's not on the level where I would like to see it, because it's not monothematic. If you have charts for everything, it's a bit of everything. It would be better to recreate those as private rivers or monothematic rivers. So, and actually, I should reach my target. In order to not just talk about my claims and my observations, I reached out to a number of newsrooms. New York Health, I already mentioned, Associated Press, both commercial and public, and they all told me that the changes they saw through the pandemic were huge. And I would like to, as a point of discussion, if the question comes up, I understand that all of the presentations here are shared, and I'm very, very open to discuss these things. It was the first time that data was a basis for far-ranging restrictions of daily life, right? In that way that we haven't seen it around the world, lockdowns and so on. There was no project plan, no budget on neither side, not on the newsrooms and not on the sides of source. And I think what was achieved in terms of ongoing reporting is quite remarkable. Of course, there's a lot to be discussed, a lot of things to be done better, but I would ask everyone to understand a little bit the situation the practitioners have been in. Science normally observes something, then makes recommendations, then you form a program, but you don't do it in real time. And they had to do it throughout the pandemic. Same for the politicians. I entirely on the side if somebody says I'm not agreeing with this or that measure. But that was the situation. So for the newsrooms, it's a breakthrough, because all of a sudden these data journalist groups, which are quite small, it's 5 to 10 out of 200, 300 journalists who are on this working in this way, they have a new standing, and that's very, very important. And I'm very grateful that is coming. What we heard quite often, say, from the larger source, that they hope that the process of picking up the data would become more streamlined. That was what my talk was basically about, like how to streamline that. And so here I'm coming up with, like, in an EU context, what my community would hope for, my one community on the journalism side would hope for from the other community on the EU side, that the sources start to think beyond their homepage. I think that's the time to do it now. Simplify reuse. Please don't PDFs. There were some PDFs of data with COVID at the beginning, and they quickly faded away because everybody said, no, I cannot work with a static page where I have to extract the data that was already in Excel just minutes before. Please, no PDFs. It's important to keep the models as consistent as possible and not change something like on the fly, because then the script stopped working. On the other side, it's of course important to have an aim to explain. That's how I call it.
Okay, very good.
So,
yeah, can you wrap it up in the next 10 seconds? I really need to move to the next. Yeah?
Yes,
sorry,
I will.
Sorry, Mirko.
The final thing is, what we observed is that there's a habit of shooting the messenger. Some of our colleagues have been highly criticized for reporting what nobody likes. I don't like the pandemic like anybody else. But I think our community should stand together if people are overly criticized and threatened. When people are threatened that are just doing their job, that's too much. And I would like to remind everyone here, if that happens, stand together and don't just let it happen. It could happen to all of us, and it's quite a task. So it's a bit risky. That's my hope, my look into the future. I think there is a correlation, even if I'm not having the mathematical formula for it, between good data, a quality process, and a better society. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. I'm open to questions.
Mirko, thank you so much. We're out of time. We're going to have to move to the next speaker, but thank you so much. And hopefully, through the networking on Swapcard, people can link with you on that. Thank you very much. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.